Just want to welcome everyone here today. My name is Bob Steffen. I'm the Director of Ignatian Formation and Adult Spirituality at Loyola High School in Los Angeles. And we're coming together. There's been a group around the Jesuits West Province formed out of the Faith Discerning Justice series that's been happening. It's been interested particularly around this issue of homelessness, those experiencing homelessness, and what we as Jesuit institutions can do. And this group has had a couple of different conversations. We did one with actually Jesuits down in Chile who have opened their retreat houses to those who are in need at this time. And then a couple weeks ago, we did one with some ministries in Los Angeles, the Urban Sanctuary of Blessed Sacrament, the Guadalupe Homeless Project at Dolores Mission, and then also one in San Francisco, the Gubbio Project, which are all programs which house or allow people to rest in churches, in parish churches. So we thought it was a natural and a great opportunity when we'd heard the news about some of the things happening up there in the Northwest, where we have two Jesuit high schools who have either opened up their facilities, in the case of the gym at Bellarmine Prep in Tacoma, or have been in long-term conversations about building housing adjacent to their property, and possibly also having people into their facilities, as is the case at Gonzaga Prep in Spokane. We have the presidents of both of those institutions with us today, so very excited about that, that we have them both here with us today. So as we begin here, just take a minute to have, perhaps we'll start with you, Michael, and just have say a little bit about who you are and also your school, to give us a context for your community.
Sure. I'm Michael Doherty. I still consider myself to be the relatively new president at Gonzaga Prep in Spokane. I moved there with my family from Chicago, where I'd been the president of an all-girls urban Catholic high school, so a very different environment. I love Spokane, and one of the things I love about Gonzaga Prep, Spokane is very much a blue-collar working-class town. And Gonzaga Prep happens to be located in the most impoverished zip code in the state of Washington, or a zip code that is routinely ranked as the most impoverished. And it's a part of town where there's a lot of very small houses that had once been the home community for kind of the mining industry, which long left. And one of the things that's unique about Gonzaga Prep, I believe, is our commitment to financial assistance. About 60% of our students receive some form of financial assistance support. We implemented a program we call Fair Share really back in 1992 that publishes tuition guidelines that are based on income level. And so I went to public high school myself, but I've never been a part of a private institution that is as socioeconomically diverse as Gonzaga Prep. One example of that, one of our marquee, student-led community service events each year is our food drive. And, we've done 2 food drives really just in the last 2 months of the COVID crisis. And those have been designed to bring food. Faculty are delivering food to the homes of our own students. And so, we're well aware of the diversity of needs within our own community. So I hope is that what you're hoping for, just in terms of background?
Yeah, absolutely. How many students do you have?
We're about 900, so 875.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, and Robert, if you wouldn't mind saying a little bit about Bellarmine Prep in Tacoma and yourself.
Sure. So I'm Rob Monterelli. I'm president at Bellarmine Prep. I'm in my 7th year as president. I also still feel like the new guy. My predecessor was there for about 17 years, so they're used to a long tenure. It takes a while to get the credibility as being the guy that's been there for a long time. I'm a graduate of the school. I served 20 years in the military. After that, Gonzaga grad too, so go Zags. I know I heard a couple down there. and came back here, moved back to the Northwest after my military service, specifically for the purpose of providing my children with the opportunity to go to Bellarmine as well, because I had known my whole life that that was a transformational institution and part of my life, and so many others that I knew. Bellarmine's a co-ed high school founded in 1928. We have about 865 students. We're located right in the middle of the southern part of Tacoma. A lot like Spokane. Tacoma is very much a blue collar town. It was, it's south of Seattle. It's the less glamorous sister of Seattle, about 35 miles south. Originally a port city, so it was a heavy industry kind of town and port services, and much like the situation in a lot of towns like that, that's hollowed out considerably over the last few decades. And the city has made, I think, a relatively good attempt at transitioning to a more service-based economy, but it's competing constantly with Seattle for those kinds of jobs, for banking, for investment, for legal representation. All of those things tend to gravitate towards Seattle, and of course the high-tech sector. So Tacoma is still very much a working class town. Bellarmine has always been viewed as a school that supports that community in particular. We have about 42% of our students on some form of financial assistance. We have a very generous community that supports that every year. But as the only Catholic high school within about a 30-mile radius, we see our mission as providing support for Catholic Jesuit education to anyone who desires it, wherever they are on the spectrum, both socioeconomically, racially, or any of the other, or religiously, really. So a large proportion of our students are not Catholic, although they're generally Christian of one denomination or another. And like all Jesuit schools, service is an integral part of our curriculum. We describe it as co-curricular, and those service activities are part of deliberate student formation across the 4 years that they're there. So engagement, particularly with the Jesuit parish in Tacoma, St. Leo's, is an opportunity for us to engage our students directly in the work that the Jesuits are doing, both in the parishes and elsewhere in the community. Yeah, I mean, I can maybe stop right there, Bob. I think that's an introduction.
Right. No, that's great, Rob. Thanks. I think that helps to give us a context for both of your schools, and I'll just highlight that service, as you indicated, is an important part of so much of Jesuit education. What really I think is striking in the case for both of your schools is the way that you've been able to take it almost to a next level. I'll dive in now, and I'll start first with you, Rob, in just talking about what has been happening in terms of your ability for your institution, in your case, I believe, to open up your facilities to those suffering from homelessness. And so just give us a little description of what the project is and how it came about.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So one of the advantages we have is because our students are involved in so much service work around the city, we have a network, and we have a lot of connections in different service institutions across the city. And so as the COVID crisis began to really impact one of those institutions, the Tacoma Rescue Mission, which is a Christian, not a Catholic, but a Christian mission downtown, began to put out feelers because they were having a real crisis with population-wise. And their real concern was being able to separate the more elderly residents so that because they were more vulnerable to the COVID transmission, and particularly at night. And so, and they were getting a lot of overflow and sort of casting about for partners. And we actually had a board member who came to us and said, who is connected directly with the mission, and had said, hey, is there some way Bellarmine can help them out? Of course, we were by that time transitioned into a distance learning mode. So our campus was more or less deserted. We still had security and some maintenance up there, but our students were all at home. Our faculty were all at home teaching them. And we had transitioned fully to that. So the first thing we thought was, well, we have a lot of space up here that we're not using right now. And I got in touch with the director of the mission and said, basically, what is it you're looking for? What do you need? And they were very excited for the offer, and they were very clear exactly what they were looking for, which made it easy for us to say, I think we have a perfect fit for you. So they just needed a place at night. They needed a place that they could provide 6 feet separation between the guests as they're sleeping. And they offered to provide, to get the guys up there in the evening and then take them back to the mission in the morning. And so all they needed from us was the facility and some security and some additional minor support. Well, we were very happy to be able to say that, and we were in a good position because the gymnasium is relatively easy to isolate from the rest of the campus. We were concerned about just maintaining accountability of everybody up there and the rest of the facility. Some of the buildings, of course, we had gone through a pretty rigorous sanitizing and then kind of locked them up. So, we wanted to make sure that we preserved that. The other concern is we're very blessed to have a fairly good sized Jesuit community living on our campus. So we have between 12 to 14 Jesuits who live in the residence on campus. Most of them are themselves elderly and would be considered potentially vulnerable. And of course, there's a security concern. We want to provide a safe environment for them. So one of the important steps was liaising with the superior of their community there. Of course, we were totally in alignment on the mission aspect of it, but it was about his responsibility about ensuring that the community was well provided for and cared for, and we were able to accommodate that. So there were a lot of other steps, and I'd be happy to kind of go into it. We had to get permitting through the city. Fortunately, unfortunately, Tacoma has a significant homeless challenge. And fortunately, the city is very motivated to try and address it. And so when the city became aware that we were talking to the mission about this, they were very proactive about how can we help you get through the permitting process quickly, because the city wanted this kind of collaboration to happen. So in a lot of ways, we were fortunate that we had a lot of support from those outside entities that needed to bless off this project. We had to do consulting with our insurance. We had to work out a pretty detailed MOU with the mission just to make sure we were clear who was doing what, who was responsible for what, and that that the liabilities were covered for both the school and for the mission. Transportation, getting the guests up from the mission to the school and back was a concern. That was something we didn't feel able to do. Our vehicle fleet had been kind of mothballed, and then that would have had additional sanitizing and maintenance requirements. But again, through the network, there's a Christian school down the road from us, Life Christian Academy, who were able to provide the vehicles. So by collaborating with them, we had buses transporting the guests up in the morning, in the evening, and then down in the morning to our campus. And then, some provisions we had to make for additional cleaning, sanitizing, and providing support for them, which we're all donating to the mission as well. The mission's been a fantastic partner. They provide the supervisors in the evening. They provided the bedding and materials. We store them at the campus, but they're there laying those out. And it's been actually very smooth, and I think a real blessing for both the mission and for Bellarmine. We had a lot of interest from our community. Once it became known that we were doing this, our parents and community were thrilled. We had a lot of outpouring of generosity from parents and from students who wanted to do something to help that, and even from our donors and benefactors who called the school wanting to give specifically to this program of the school, either goods and supplies or cash donations. So we've worked out with the rescue mission how we handle those donations. But it sparked just kind of a whole wave of additional support from the Bellarmine community when they became aware that we were doing this. in general, we didn't encounter a lot of obstacles. Everyone understood this is what we're about. People were enthusiastic about figuring out how to make it work. We had collaterally, we didn't do it for that reason, but collaterally some very good media coverage, which is always welcome for a Catholic high school in a relatively, however you want to describe it, unchurched part of the country. So there was a lot of great support. And I think that goes back again to the case that homeless issues are a really hot topic in our community right now. And they're a big focus of local media and local government. And so for Bellarmine to be able to respond and partner with an institution like the Rescue Mission, it just kind of was it was a really good news story for the city about how different ministries can collaborate to address that need. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of the other minor things you have to deal with that I'm sure that all of you in your ministries are familiar with in terms of code issues and permitting and things you have to take care of. We have not had any major challenges. One concern we did have was making sure we were clear in our communication that we're not an intake center. So, because we did start to have people show up at the school wanting to, they felt they could just kind of show up and be admitted to the shelter for the night. So we had to be clear that that all takes place down at the Rescue Mission during the day. And that's where the intake is. And then they're brought up to the school. So for the first couple of weeks, we had some folks coming up that hadn't been cleared by the mission and weren't known to them. So we had to redirect them. But we didn't end up with, a large conglomeration of people with no affiliation with the mission that were showing up and causing difficulty. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of in a nutshell it's been a real blessing for us. And I hope for the mission as well. And certainly for our students to see what it looks like when a Jesuit institution lives out its mission in a way that perhaps they didn't think of the school that way, but they realized that we're bigger than just a school. And our mission compels us to do a little more than that.
Well, it's a great example. I know I found it very inspiring when I saw the news article that kind of came across my feed. And to your point about great example of living out the mission, especially in these difficult times. And also, I wasn't aware of how much wonderful collaboration there was as part of this project. The ability to collaborate with the mission, but also kind of with another school and everybody being able to come together in a relatively quick time frame. It's quite impressive. And inspiring. I'm going to turn to Michael now, and I know in talking with him before that there were some other challenges that came up. I think you talked, Rob, about some of the ease in which you were able to get the permitting and everything. I believe in Michael's case, it's been a little bit of a different situation and challenge. And Michael, I'd ask you to talk about that, but also to talk about kind of the longer range process of your involvement with Catholic Charities, because I think that'll be of interest to this group as well.
Sure. I think we do have two parts to our story. One has kind of a longer arc than the other, and the other has been kind of more immediate response to COVID. But, it was a few years ago when the Jesuits West put out their revised vision, mission, and values statement that we really heard loud and clear the call to, increased local collaboration amongst the Jesuit works for the purpose of supporting the church and especially attentiveness to the needs of the marginalized and the poor. And, so it was at that time, I think one of the real gifts of Spokane is that because of, the size of our town, we are in really close relationship with GU, and St. Al's, the Jesuit parish in Spokane. And so we came together and really started a long discernment process about how could we collaborate, to bring about the call of the Jesuits West. And we welcomed in Catholic Charities to our conversations. And Catholic Charities in Spokane has been really successful at gaining access to federal tax credits for the purpose of building shelters, and long-term housing for homeless people in Spokane. And the dream was born to build what we're calling Gonzaga Family Haven. And as luck would have it, there was a vacant corner that is adjacent to our property. So we're not very far from GU. We're about a mile and a half. And the best site that was available is where, we would call it our overflow football parking lot that had been owned by the city of Spokane and, is adjacent to our facility. We share a fence line. And it's been a long-term process, but the vision here, and the land has been purchased by Catholic Charities, and they're moving forward with construction this fall for building 75 units of affordable family housing. And kind of like Rob is describing, homelessness has become a really controversial issue in Spokane. It was really the primary distinguishing feature of our recent mayoral race. Those candidates were distinguished by whether or not they wanted to criminalize homelessness or support it. And Catholic Charities, because of their housing first approach, and not setting up additional contingencies about sobriety or, other contingencies like that, has really been in the crosshairs of the local media. So we felt it was really important for us to be, first of all, vocal about our support of Catholic Charities, but then when it came down to it, to really, provide support that was action-oriented and more than just words. Catholic Charities has had a lot of tough press because of temporary shelters for adults and kind of the externalities that have gone along with those. So one of the things that was unique about Gonzaga Family Haven is that it is for families. The dream here and what we're working towards is that Gonzaga University and Gonzaga Prep will collaborate together to provide volunteer services that we hope support those families in breaking the cycle of poverty. And we're looking forward to reorganizing our Christian service program in a manner that is specifically supportive of the youth residents and providing, academic and social enrichment experiences that we hope help them to close the academic achievement gap, but also provide them with the social opportunities that make prep a really welcoming place for them. Our long-term goal is that those students, as they reach high school age, will have the opportunity to come to prep. And, we're thinking carefully about how we can raise the scholarship funds, but I think more importantly, the kind of internal structural resources that we know they're going to need to help support their success. One of the things we're really excited about is that in our experience, one of the greatest challenges of serving at-risk youth is the high rates of mobility that they face and the difficulty of establishing long-term relationships. And so, our hope is that the long-term housing aspect of this development is going to give us a chance to develop relationships with kids, hopefully at a very young age, and to accompany them throughout their elementary and middle school years, and then through high school, and then hopefully onto GU or other colleges as well. So that process had kind of all the abilities. It moved at a pace that enabled us to enter into discernment and to really bring our community into that discernment process. It kind of set us up, though, in a relationship with Catholic Charities, that when Catholic Charities had the stay-at-home and social distancing order, they had to cut their facilities capacities by about half. And they found themselves at a real deficit for space. And Catholic Charities received a request for proposal from the city of Spokane for opening a temporary shelter for families. And the city gave them 24 hours to respond. And so Catholic Charities reached out to us. This was right around Easter, I can remember, because we were filming our Easter Mass for our students. And Catholic Charities had given us about 6 hours to make a decision about would we be willing to open up our auxiliary gym for the purpose of housing about 60 guests, all of whom would be families. And so we did not have the opportunity for the kind of discernment that we typically would like to bring to such a big decision. I've got to tell you, Rob and Bellarmine, your example there was meaningful to us and absolutely advanced our conversation and our level of comfort that we could do this. And so the fact that there was another school that had already confronted this decision and that, we knew we could learn from that experience was meaningful to us. The fact that we also were, coming together to celebrate Easter Mass, I think also supported our rapid discernment because it just made clear for us, that who we're serving here is Christ. And it just made clear for us the importance of the decision. Now, the obstacles that Bob referenced go back to our city and our county, who, even though they put out the RFP a month ago, have delayed the approval. And we thought we'd be welcoming people into our gym a month ago. And then last time I talked to you, Bob, I thought it was dead in the water. And I said, we don't want to take credit for something that never came to pass. Lo and behold, Catholic Charities got approved like 2 days ago. And so we're now scrambling again to make this a reality and to welcome these guests. Yeah, I think from the school perspective, something that you can all appreciate is that, what we're asked to balance here is first and foremost our priority to serve our current students and families. And we have a staff and school leadership who is so eager and hopeful of our ability to return to serving students, whether it's through summer camps or clubs, but just getting back face to face. And the challenges that come along with concurrently having students on campus while operating a temporary shelter. Our shelter is not nights only. So we'll have residents who are there 24/7. Further, they're going to be utilizing the same spaces that our camps would likely need as well. One of the challenges that Catholic Charities has through their contract is we've got to give them a month notice before we can excuse them from their lease. And so we're trying to navigate, when do we think we're going to have full use of our facility and the ability to welcome back students? And how do we balance that with the immediate need of serving the guests that Catholic Charities is helping us to welcome? So I think that that's just a really natural tension. I think for us, this decision is made so much easier by the fact that we don't have students on campus right now. And there's just so many additional complexities that go along with it. I don't think they're insurmountable. And I think we may develop a level of comfort that helps to lead us forward in that situation. But, you're certainly navigating a lot of anxieties along the way. And we've received, both supportive calls and calls of concern from members of our community about our plans here.
Well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate your comments there about how much there is to balance in terms of, what we're called to do as institutions, whatever type of institution we are. And at the same time, really the openness that you were as a school able to approach this opportunity. It is a great example, I think, of openness and in kind of a Ignatian sense, the freedom to listen to where we might be called and invited. And also just to highlight, I think it's amazing that the long-term commitment that you as a school with other institutions have made to this housing, right? Because of course we're trying to address both the immediate needs, but also the longer-term structural realities of this challenge of homelessness. So thank you. I think a great example of as well of what's possible. I'm going to ask one more question, but I'll just let our people know that are listening in here. You could add, if you have some questions, please put them in the chat now. I'm going to ask Rob and Michael one more question, and then we'll move to kind of a Q&A, but I want to feel free to kind of key up some of those questions so we have them. What I'd like to do just as this last question is part of this whole process is listening, and as you were saying, Michael, the example of an institution can then have inspire another, and kind of the example is something that we want to highlight and reflect on. So as you think about your experience of this discernment process, short or long, and also the graces and the challenges that have been there, what advice, what thoughts, what wisdom might you offer to other uh, institutions as they think about how best to open their doors, or simply to just to discern how to be of help in this challenge, this crisis of homelessness, which is affecting so many of our different cities? And I'll let either one of you go first on that.
You're still unmuted, Michael. I was going to let you go first.
Um, I think what was fundamental to our ability to respond to Catholic Charities when they presented us with a very time-sensitive request that did not give us the ability to really engage in discernment. What gave us the freedom to respond to that was the fact that we had already been in relationship with them, and we had already identified our desire to support them in their work, to serve the homeless. And so, and I don't think, when we first began these conversations about the long-term planning, we never imagined that it would grow into this. But I think it's just that, that's the nature of relationship, that when we walk together, it's easier for us to be responsive to the needs of each other. And that relationship, I think, is certainly changing us. And I'll be bluntly honest here too. Schools are really unique and strange institutions, right? I mean, and Catholic Charities is a very different kind of organization, and they face very different kinds of challenges. And I've kind of learned that over time. I think their motto is ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And that's just part of the nature of their work, that they're so serving on the front lines. And we've had to learn how to dance with that. And schools hate surprises, right? I mean, we hate surprises. And Catholic Charities is full of surprises. So we just kind of have to get used to the fact that they're dealing with different realities and challenges than we face normally. And, that's part of what I think a good partnership is a willingness to, be with each other in our light and our dark.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I would say absolutely that it's about partnerships and collaboration, and the work that was done in advance just over the years of working with places like the Rescue Mission, places like St. Leo and Sacred Heart. Thank you, Annie, reminded me. Sacred Heart is now part of the Jesuit parish community there in Tacoma. And institutional relationships, and then also just personal relationships, knowing the directors of those organizations and supporting one another. You may not use those relationships, quote unquote, until a crisis comes up or something where you need it, but the relationship is there, and then suddenly the opportunity presents itself and you're able to respond quickly. And I think that was the key for us. Michael's totally right, and you all know it. Schools are difficult, challenging. Obviously I didn't come out of schools. I was in the military, and then in private nonprofits for a while. So sometimes I'm a little unencumbered by that, which causes challenges sometimes for the school, because I'll be like, well, sure, we can do that. And then the school will be like, wait a minute. But I think that's good. Personally, because we can push ourselves to think about things, and maybe some of those things that we're accustomed to believing are just insurmountable are actually not, if we really want something to happen. The two other big things I think that were key for us, one is I always put a big emphasis on flexibility and adaptability as a part of the institution's long-term strategy for resilience. You don't know what the future is going to totally look like, but the best you can do is be able to be open to adaptation. I remember when the COVID crisis first started, and Father General did, an interview that maybe many of you saw, and he was asked that question about how do we respond, how do we keep doing our mission when we can't interact with the people we serve, or we're like a school, we're a high touch, relationship driven kind of organization. How do we do that? And his response was, you're just being called to figure out how to do it in a different way. It doesn't change the mission, it doesn't change who you are, but we're being called to innovate and find new ways to do what we have always known how to do. And we've worked really hard to kind of build that into the DNA of our response as we go through this COVID thing. The other thing I think is just long-term investment in formation. And that operates at so many levels. With our board, we have a very deliberate board formation process, as I'm sure many of you do. We work with our board members from the beginning, so they understand what it means to be a board member of a Jesuit institution, and they're not surprised when a Jesuit institution wants to do something Jesuit, because sometimes you can have board members who do, and it's not perfect. And Annie knows we've still had some conversations on that, and I still have work to do. But we have a good board, and they believe in this. There's nobody in our board who said, "Why are we doing this? This doesn't make sense. This isn't, we're a school. We shouldn't be doing that." I mean, we just didn't run into that. And it's the same as the investment in formation of our faculty and our students and their parents. So we talk all the time about what it means to be a Jesuit school, what our values are. So that means when you get faced with a decision like this on a short decision timeline and a discernment process, it's much quicker to build consensus, because very few people are coming out of the gate at the beginning scratching their head saying, "Why are we even talking about this? This isn't who we are." It very quickly just moves to, well, of course we need to do something. And now let's talk about the physical challenges or the materiality of how do we make it happen, not should we be doing this. And I think that's a payoff from formation efforts that go on all the time, so that the community is mentally and spiritually prepared to respond to the call when it happens. That helps you do it on a much quicker timeline. I think that was important for us.
No, absolutely. It's such a key element. The more that you know who you are, the easier it is to discern, right? In that formation. And I think, as both of you are talking about, that deepening awareness of your identity is such a key important part in that ability to make a decision. We've got a number of questions here. I think I might suggest that we group a couple. Just on that point, we have a couple questions around kind of a deepening sense of, a community service, and then also your sense of connection. And then we've got another group of questions around collaboration. So just to get a few other voices in here, I might ask Matt Harper and then Christian Estrand just to say your question. We'll do those kind of together, and then we'll do the regional, the collaboration ones. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So first off, thank you both so much. And for time purposes, I'll just dive into it. Thinking about this moment will end, COVID-19 will end, and you'll have the chance to have taken these learnings and incorporated them into your systems and structures and ethos, or you won't have. Bluntly, I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but how might you take this to transform pieces of your institution so that relationships, deep commitment to justice work can continue? And if you've already done that, what has that looked like in your programs?
And then I'll just add on to that question, Christian, if you think it's related, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and so mine certainly revolves around the idea of how do you really deepen that connection of not just the institution, but faculty, staff, and students in tangible ways to create a lasting sense of belonging in your own community that helps to inspire that same sense of justice work going forward after the crisis is over.
Yeah, would one of you want to speak to that, to this idea of deepening, connecting, taking what you've learned going forward?
I think we have a lot of work to do on that. I think we're pretty focused on the execution, just getting it up and running, and then figuring out how to sustain it for the balance of when they're going to need it. I think, as Michael said, if this had happened while we were in session, while we had students on campus, it would have been much different and much more challenging for us to try and do. Um, we're just doing the evening thing, so we probably could have figured out a workaround, but it would have been a far more complicated undertaking. And part of the disappointment of this has been our students have wanted to be involved, and they've come forward and said, what can we do? How can we do stuff? And of course, because of the COVID, the whole point of this is really separating these particularly potentially vulnerable guys from, frankly, students are one of the primary potential carriers of this. So we really had to be careful and unfortunately tell our students, there's not a lot you can do directly to be part of this. You can make signs, you can provide, you can donate stuff, you can be visible in your support for it, but engaging them directly in the work has been more a case of educating them on what an institution like a school can do in this situation. The hope would be, as we return to a more normal way of life and ability to interact and things, that the relationships we've cemented with institutions like the rescue mission, we can kind of take to another level, where we can explore more opportunities for our students to be directly involved in the work of that mission, or other institutions. Catholic Charities has a mission house also in Tacoma. They had a different solution to their problem, but they've seen now what we're capable of doing to support their work. And I think it'll open up doors for us to talk about how we can move this thing forward and how we can engage our students in the ongoing work of those institutions, even when we're not under a COVID requirement. The other thing is our faculty has been very supportive too. And we've actually, our counseling department came to me and said, hey, we want to support this. Do they need help? We can be counselors for the guests there. And I talked to the mission, and the mission came back and said, actually, your counselors could really help with our staff, because it's our staff who's being, who are being particularly stressed now, and we don't have the ability to provide support for them. So our counseling department in particular, one of the members of our department who specializes in that kind of work has been, able to provide support to the staff of the rescue mission, sort of as an auxiliary to this. So those kind of relationships, again, are things that I think we can carry forward and then hopefully make visible to our students and our community in a way that reinforces the messages that we're trying to communicate with this. Is that helpful? Answer your question?
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. No, raising some really good points and things, elements to think about. Michael, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think it's a really important question. And, I think part of me, when I look at COVID, whether it's a blessing or a curse, I think this is going to be with us for some time now. And it really is going to shift the way we act, immediately next year and the year beyond. So whether we like it or not, we're going to have a continued opportunity to deepen our experiences and actions during this time. For me, the long-term opportunity of Gonzaga Family Haven gives us a much more stable ground to plan for the future. We have to revamp our Christian service program, which we had actually just revamped 2 years before. And without Gonzaga Family Haven, we would have, had a long road of improvement and just strategy where we want to go. But now with Gonzaga Family Haven, we've kind of had to go back to the drawing board again, just because there's an entirely different level of opportunity about engaging our students in what we hope is going to be a really well integrated service program, and something that will really become a relationship that becomes part of the fabric of who we are. We've implemented an alumni service corps 2 years ago, where we welcome graduates of either Jesuit colleges or college graduates who have gone to Jesuit schools. And they provide service for a year at our school while living on campus. And, we're planning to grow that program in an effort, I hope, to build bridges. Like, my dream is that those folks are going to provide half their time at Gonzaga Family Haven and half their time at Prep. Because I think the more people you have going between those two programs, the more likely you're going to have the kind of communication that you need to really sustain it. It's too much for one person to manage.
Yeah. No, and great. I think to think about there's a lot involved, right, in making these things sustainable, and a lot of thought in terms of all the elements from Christian service to the employee staff. Probably have not time for kind of one more question. What I'm going to ask is we group several questions that have been in the chat around kind of collaboration, which is such an important part. And so I'll ask JP to go, and then Jesse, and then Nathan, if you could speak. So we'll get from here, we'll get a university perspective, a high school perspective, and a service provider about that. I know your situations. Some, you have a university in Tacoma, there's not a Jesuit university, but you're all doing collaboration as you talk about. So it'd be great to hear those different voices. So JP, would you mind?
Sure. Thank you, Bob. My question was just, what was Gonzaga's role, if any, and the response as a result of afterwards? I mean, I'm sure the publicity helps, but I see LMU positioned very similarly in a city that's plagued by housing issues, and we do have a large homelessness issue being, I think, pastored and taken care of by parishes, by specifically 2 Jesuit parishes, but I think LMU has all the resources that any high school has, and we could do it. So it's a combination of what was Gonzaga's response and what could you see other Jesuit universities doing.
Great. And then Jesse, I know you were asking about that from the high school perspective, that same sort of collaboration, if you wouldn't mind just saying a little bit about your question there.
Yeah, no, I'm wondering also the same thing, where we're located in Pico Union, it's so central to the law school, Catholic Charities down the street, the Archdiocese of LA central office. So, and the partnerships that we've already, established through the work that Bob's engaged in with LMU. So what advice would you give? Certainly, I mean, I think, Michael, to your point, you're right. This is going to be with us for a while. And, how do we tap into those resources that we have? That's all.
Thanks, Jesse. And then Nathan, just from the service provider perspective, I know you'd raised that in terms of collaboration.
Yeah, well, I really appreciated what you had to say about not asking permission and just asking for forgiveness, because I feel like that's what we constantly do in our world. So in some ways, I want to ask more about the perspective of putting together, or would you be open to working on a project to put together a template that would look like replication for other schools, whether that's universities, even elementary schools, to replicate a sort of model like that, especially around the connection that I really appreciate. Robert, you mentioned to the point of building that relationship with service providers. The service providers, I will say, and I'll speak for a lot of them, that they would just be chomping at the bit for a partnership like that, because the thing we have to be very honest about is the reality that we're all starved for space, and space is increasingly expensive. But if there was more space available, I for one would say, sign us up. We'll figure out how to staff it. We'll figure out how to do the technical support. So could there be a project where we put together a template like that to empower other schools to do similar things?
Great. So no, we don't have a lot of time, but I hope that both Michael and Rob, you see that, you're inspiring a lot of thought, excitement, energy here, and just any thoughts you could offer us on this idea of partnering, relationship models or structures that might be able to be built.
Michael, why don't you go first, and you can talk to the GU piece, because
Yeah. So, I was really fortunate to come into an environment where there was already collaboration between GU, St. Al's Parish, and Gonzaga Prep. And, GU and Gonzaga Prep share the same origin story. So that partnership has been there, from the very beginning. GU has made it a strategic priority to pursue a place-based initiative. So they've been working very intentionally on understanding the needs of our local community And, you know, again, we're just fortunate that the local community that they're targeting is the same exact one that we're located in. So, you know, there's nice overlap there. I've participated in GU's Place-Based Initiative Planning Council, and the development of Gonzaga Family Haven has become kind of a specific aspect of that overall place-based initiative. GU is going to have offices at the Gonzaga Family Haven and is thinking really intentionally about how it's going to provide services at Gonzaga Family Haven. So, you know, it's going to be up to us, Prep and GU, to really work together to collaborate. You know, I think part of the experience as a high school is that the university is an 800-pound gorilla, and we've experienced that a little bit, and we're kind of used to it, but we've got a sense of pride too. And so, you know, we try to elbow in and, you know, hold our space there as well. But we're really lucky to have great relationships with GU and Catholic Charities, and so that supports it. And again, the size of our town means that we share board members and, you know, people who are donors and benefactors. When they're behind this, it makes everything a little bit easier too. I'd be happy to do anything we can to share our experience. Nathan, I'm not sure if you're talking about the kind of short-term, you know, responsiveness or the long-term, but anything we can do to help. And I'm sure that GU would be more than delighted to have, you know, for there to be recognition of this program as something that other schools might want to implement.
Well, that's great to hear. I think this opportunity could really be one where we're learning from each other for more long-term systematic changes. It's great. Rob?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. We don't have an 800-pound big brother leaning over our shoulder, but sometimes it'd be nice if we did, because we'd have a little more influence in the local community too. But I'm inspired, and just hearing from Michael about having a long-term vision for how this works, and not just the ability to be responsive in a short-term crisis, which certainly was great, and we're very blessed that we're able to. But a big part of this, and it goes back to the question about how do we sustain the momentum of it, and how do we ingrain in our students something to take away from this. And you know, I'm always pushing us as we work on justice issues with students, that entry point of, you know, being at the front line and providing the service, or working at the food bank, or handing out sandwiches on the street there with the group from St. Leo's and stuff. That's important, and they need to do that, and they need to experience it. What I want to make sure they take away from this is start asking, why is this even necessary in the first place? What's going on that requires the school to do this, to be this responsive? And so the lessons you can learn from that, you can learn tactical lessons about how can an institution go through the process of getting its gym permitted so that it can house homeless people. And how can we build relationships between organizations? That's great. But we really also want them to go back and saying, what's going on in our society that requires this response? And are there changes that we can make at a bigger level that will, you know, make it easier for us to ameliorate these problems rather than just attending to the consequences of them? You know, we're just starting them on that journey. And obviously that at university level is where they're hopefully going to really dive into that. But a lot of the takeaway from this with our students will be more about looking at what's structurally, systemically going on here in Tacoma that it prompted Bellarmine to respond in this way. And hopefully, you know, that kind of work, because that's not restricted by COVID, we can have those conversations anytime, and we can really help them see this was a living example of a situation that is going to require leaders like you in the future to solve. And I think as far as building the collaboration going forward, it's just learning from each other. You know, it's been said a couple times here that the sort of, you know, move first and then ask permission thing. Schools, as we've noted, don't do that all that well. Even in this case, when the mission came to us, the mission was like, okay, here's a letter from us, let's go. And I was kind of like, yeah, sure, I guess that sounds okay. And then, you know, my insurance guy was calling up saying, "Hey, have you looked at the insurance? Are you sure we're good?" And the city's like, "Let's make sure those permits are right." And I'm like, "Yeah, we'll figure all that stuff out. We need to do something." And there's right on both sides of that, right? And so the collaboration is really important because we learn from each other. We know how to be a really good school. We don't necessarily know how to be a really good homeless shelter. We have to learn that from the people from the experts. And at the same time, they need to learn, well, it's not just a function of throwing open the doors to the gym because the kids aren't there. There's things we have to think about as a school. And that just comes from being together a lot and learning from each other and then from doing it together. So I would be very happy to contribute to any kind of process to capture this in a template or in some kind of flow chart or checklist or something to help organizations navigate some of this stuff, or at least capture the way that we've done it in conjunction with the great work that Michael's done at GPrep too. If it would be helpful, I would be happy to participate in that.
Well, thank you to both of you. I mean, I think that it's such an inspiration to hear both what you've been willing to do and also the reflective way that you've thought about all the different steps, right? And knowing that there's always a tension, but that ultimately we're called to move forward and to know that we don't know everything, and but through relationships, through collaborations, we can learn and we can improve together. I want to honor that I told our presenters an hour of their time, and so I'm going to bring us to a conclusion here. So grateful for both of you for taking the time to share with us. I hope you did hear, among at least a few questions we were able to pose, the energy and excitement that's here. I mean, there is a real desire, I hope, and we'll look forward in following up with both of you about ways that we might be able to take what you've learned and share it out in a format or tactics or plans, because that is something that I know that there's a desire, certainly among the community that I've been part of. Thank you to both you, Michael and Rob. It was amazing. It was a great conversation. I'm so grateful for what you're doing and your willingness to share your experiences and your insights with us. Thank you.